Okay, welcome back to the demonstration part of our duct sealing training. So what we're going to look at right now are the different materials and tools that you would use in order to actually do duct sealing. And unlike a lot of other types of weatherization tasks, duct sealing doesn't take a lot of equipment or money to really get started in. Okay, so as you can see on this table here, this is about everything we actually need to do duct sealing. And so I'll start with the materials first. And so this is a bucket of what we call duct mastic. Okay, this particular one is RCD. But what's important is not the brand name, but that it be rated to Underwriter Laboratory 181M. And so it would be UL 181M rated. And that's what you're really looking for when you get the mastic, okay? Because that's what everybody wants to use on the duct systems. Okay, so this is our main sealant. This is what we try to use all the time. Now, if we need to span a gap more than a 1/4 inch, like I said earlier, then we need to use this mesh tape to span that gap first. And it's a lot like drywall tape, right? We span the gaps with this, and then we put a nice nickel thick layer of mastic on it. When we attach flex duct to hard duct, we want to use what are called cable ties. And that's a cable tie right here. And what we're going to do with this is we're going to wrap it around the connection, and then we're going to use this tensioning tool right here to make it nice and tight by ratcheting it together. And then we're going to use this little lever here to cut it off nice and short so it doesn't scratch you. All right. Once we get it nice and tight on there, the next thing we would do is we would use this cordless screw gun with the 1/4 inch hex driver and some self-tapping screws, and we would go through either side of that. We would go through either side of the tension strap to make sure that it can't pop off of here. Because if we were to put this this on here in the wintertime when it's cold and the metal is has contracted, and then it heats up, what it will do is it'll heat up and cool down, and eventually that strap will loosen and it will pop off. So we put a screw on either side through the tension strap into the metal so that it can't pop off. It always has to stay there. And then once we do that, we'll seal that seam with mastic, and then pull the insulation up and over it also, and attach that with a tension strap. Okay. So okay, yeah, so we haven't talked about all the different tools here. So this tool right here is for actually cutting the wire helix in the flex duct, okay? Because this is hardened steel, and this is hardened steel, and this will cut that very easily. You don't want to use these right here. These are actually tin shears, and they're not hardened steel, and what will happen when you try to cut that is you'll put big divots in the blade, and it will be very difficult to use them to cut other things, okay? These work a lot like scissors. You can cut a lot of different things with it, but if you try to cut those, you're going to destroy them. Okay, so have a pair of nips, and also have a pair of shears. This is obviously just a razor knife, right? Just a tool that's usable in a lot of different weatherization jobs. As I said, this is the tensioning tool and the tension cutter. This is called a P35. This is actually a stapler. So if I'm actually installing duct on like a trunk and I'm wrapping around it, when I bring the seam together, remember that I don't want to pull it real tight, but I do want to have a couple inches of overlap that I'm going to roll together, and then I'm going to take this staple gun and go right down it like that, about every inch or two. And what this stapler does is it doesn't go through and come around like this. It goes through, and the staple ends go out like that, and it holds it in place really well. So this is really the tool of choice for putting on duct insulation. Final tool here, you're probably familiar with this if you've done anything in any industry. This is just a caulking gun, and we typically use that with silicone at the joints of the different components of an air handling system, like from the air handler to the cooling coil, or from the air handler to the first connection to the trunk, or the plenum rather. And the reason why we do that is because if we need to change out a piece of equipment, we want to be able to just cut the bead of silicone and take the piece of equipment off. If we use duct mastic, which is a much more powerful sealant, the HVAC contractor will have a hard time getting that disconnected and pulled off. Okay. So I think I've looked at everything here. So why don't we start out talking about how we would seal hard duct to hard duct joint. This is a branch takeoff off of a trunk. Okay, and oftentimes they are round like this and not necessarily like that. And so in this particular one, we have gaps greater than a 1/4 inch, which means that if we're going to span a gap greater than a 1/4 inch, we're going to need to use mesh tape. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the mesh tape to span those gaps. Now, if I'm going to use the mesh tape on a nice straight joint like this one, which also has big gaps, I can just go right down it like that, fold it over, and it's very easy, okay? when I want to go around something that's round, that's connected to something flat, it's a little bit different. Because when I try to make this attach, what's going to happen is it's going to, see how it like kind of lifts all over the place? I'm not going to be able to do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to gauge how long it is around it, right? With the roll, come right around to there. Then I'm going to take my shears, right? These are not wire cutters, they're shears, right? See how nice and sharp those are? Then what I'm going to do is cut about a 1-inch cut, about every inch along this. And what this is going to do is it's going to allow this to bend around that circle and sit flat. Almost there. Okay, so now you can see it's cut, right? And so what we'll do now is the cut end will go down on the flat part, and you see how it splays out like that and sits nice and flat. This stuff is actually kind of sticky, right? So you gotta kind of get it where you want it when you first place it. Okay, we can see that what we've got now, oops, I gotta go a little bit lower there. Okay, is that this has splayed out into position, and now it's covering those gaps. And what I can do now is I can just go ahead and put mastic on that. And remember that you want to wear, your glove for sure. And probably if I was going to actually be doing duct sealing, I would put another more heavy-duty cloth glove over this, so that when I'm rubbing my hands over all this duct work, where all these really sharp edges are, I won't be cutting myself all up, right? Because you need to protect yourself from that. In the space, if I was working in an attic or a crawl space, I would definitely be wearing a half-face respirator and probably a suit, right, too, to keep all the fiberglass and stuff off of me. Okay, so what I'm going to do is take a nice thick layer of the mastic and just start covering, just like that. Remember that we want the mastic to be nickel thick, right? Because the ducts do heat up and cool down, and when they're moving like that all the time, if the mastic is nice and thick, it's very rubbery, and then it moves also and expands and contracts with the duct. But if it's too thin, it doesn't do that. What it does is it actually cracks. Okay, so sometimes you'll see people put this on with a paintbrush, and I'm not saying don't do that, but all I'm saying is that if you do that, make sure that you still put on a nice thick layer. Okay, so just like that. I'm not going to bother to do the whole thing. You can kind of have the idea, right? Don't be stingy with the mastic. The mastic doesn't cost a lot of money, and there's no sense doing a job that's not going to last anyway. So your labor is a lot more expensive than the mastic is. I don't think I'm going to cover that quite yet. Okay. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to look at actually attaching a piece of flex duct to a piece of hard duct and how we would do that. Okay. So the first thing we want to do is make sure that the wire helix, right, gets up and onto the duct itself. Because what we would have done is we would have come along and disconnected this, pulled the insulation back down here, and then we would pull this up like this. And then what we want to do is we want to fasten it in place with this tension tie. Okay, and so you want to make sure you get around it first. Okay, make sure you actually get one of the wires, right? You don't want to be just grabbing the mylar. You want to make sure you've got one wire on the other side of that too, just like that. Okay. Okay, yeah, looks like I'm good. Make sure you've grabbed the whole duct. Then we're going to use the tensioning tool. And we're going to do, I think it goes this way. We're going to pull it right down there and just tighten it up. Now it's not necessary to like tighten it up so much you start crushing the duct. Okay, just as hand tight. And then this little lever down here will actually cut it for you. See it there? And so I cut it off nice and short like that. Now that I've done that, the next thing I want to do is I want to make sure that, because I was saying the duct expands and contracts, if I put this on when it's really warm and the duct is expanded, even though I think this is tight, it's not as tight as it won't be all that tight when the duct contracts and gets smaller. So what I want to do is use these 1/4-inch self-tapping screws and go on either side of this. I'm going to step around the table here so you can get a better look at this. And I'm going to go right through the tension strap and into the duct. Okay, just like that. Then I'll do exactly the same thing on the other side. And no matter what happens now, this won't pop off. So once I put the one on the other side, then I'll grab once again, a nice thick layer of duct mastic, and we'll start, sealing this up, excuse me, all the way around, just like that. Once again, nice and thick, right? And I'll go all the way around, right underneath, etc. Okay. Okay, once I've got it sealed up really good, this mastic tends to get everywhere. That's the one thing you will find is you'll have as much on yourself as you do on the ducts when you're done. What we want to do now is, remember that we just peeled this insulation back a little ways, right? And so what we're going to do is we're going to pull the insulation back into place, right, and up and over here, right onto the boot as far as we can, just like that. And then we're going to take another tensioning strap and do exactly the same thing. Okay, now this tensioning strap will wrap around here, and we'll get it up onto the boot nice and tight, right? And just this one we just got a tension tight when you don't need to screw through this. If this, this probably won't move back and forth anyway because it's not going to be under the stress that the other duct is. Okay, so just tension tight this one and just to hold it in place. And I remember that when we are insulating the duct, right, especially if we're talking about a cooling system, get this as far up as you can and make sure that you get all the steel insulated and not exposed, because in a cooling system in a warm attic, that's when we're going to get a lot of condensation and then water dripping onto the ceiling and that sort of thing. So we don't want any exposed steel if the system has cooling and it's in an attic or a warm, humid place. Okay, and I think that's everything I wanted to demonstrate this morning. Do I have any questions?